had stolen tips from DoorDash or skimmed tips from DoorDash. And it's usually determined that either the person is trolling, just looking for attention, or in another situation, it could be that maybe they received that order from a third-party app. And what I mean by third-party is it's like, it could be likely that the restaurant had the order received on their app or their website, and they may have been, let's say, short on drivers. So they contracted that one out to DoorDash from their restaurant. And in that duration, it's my understanding that they do have certain editing capabilities, meaning that, let's say, a customer placed the order through the restaurant app or restaurant webpage and left a $10 tip before that restaurant contracts it out to DoorDash. And again, it's my understanding, they could alter that tip to be, instead of $10 for the DoorDasher, to $5 for the DoorDasher and $5 for their restaurant staff. That's my understanding. So if the DoorDasher picks up the order and it says $5, they drop it off and the customer says, hey, I hope you enjoy that $10 tip, and they complete the order and it reflects only $5, they may be under the impression that DoorDash shorted them on tips, when in actuality, it was a result of a third-party app instead. So again, there could be misunderstandings in that situation. I don't think it's personally ethical, but that's just my opinion, but it is legal. And again, that's one situation where it would be no fault of DoorDash. My situation, entirely different. This doesn't involve a third-party operation at all. No compromises through a third party. In fact, after almost 30 days and being relentless, I might add, I finally had DoorDash admit that there were missing tips. In fact, they paid me almost after 30 days the remaining balance. I have a voicemail recording of that admittance, as well as a screen capture of the balance to which I was owed almost 30 days ago. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, so let me go ahead and back up. Typical DoorDash day, I received a stacked order while I was on the road. I accepted it. After doing the drop-offs, I had a question about one of those drop-offs, so I called DoorDash support. And while they recapped the order, they also mentioned the tip amount. And it was then that kind of raised an eyebrow, because the tip amount she mentioned was not reflected on my earnings app. So I explained this to her. I said, what do we do? And she said, well, what you need to do is you need to, after your shift ends, close out the DoorDash app, wait 30 minutes, open the app again after it's been refreshed, and you should receive the remaining balance of your earnings. I thought, fair enough. So I followed those instructions. After my shift ended, waited 30 minutes, reopened the app. There was no new additions to my earnings. And I still didn't think very much about it. I thought, well, let me just wait till the next day. I'm sure that'll fix it. So the next day, I reopened the app. In fact, I tried this several times, and there's no new additions to my earnings. So right now, I have only received 50% of the tips to which I was entitled. And as most of you know, if not all of you know, DoorDash states that the driver receives 100% of the tips. And again, keep in mind, this is not a result of a third-party app. This is directly with DoorDash. I call DoorDash again. This time I'm at my house. And so I asked for the representative's name. I also asked for the event ID number, which I did on the previous call as well. And for those of you not familiar with the event ID number, every time you call DoorDash, they have an ID number which is unique. So that way, if you need to call back and follow up on a situation, they can reference that ID number for their records. So I asked for that information as well. Since I'm at home, I also did something as well as getting that documentation. When you call DoorDash support, most of you are probably aware that there is a recording. And on that recording, it says, this session may be recorded for quality assurance and training purposes, etc. That recording does not say only DoorDash may record this session. It does not say you do not have permission to record this session. Instead, DoorDash provides express consent for the session to be recorded. Again, the recorded message that is, before speaking to a live representative, states, this session may be recorded. And so since they have provided me with this opportunity, I did record the conversation. So when I spoke with this second representative, she pulls up the records, reads off that customer amount, and reiterates exactly what I was told the day before. So in other words, this isn't as though I called yesterday and there was a misunderstanding. I misunderstood the representative, or she was looking at an entirely different record. At this point, the second representative recaps the order and reiterates what I was told the day before. In other words, I only received half the tip amounts to which I was entitled. Now, I should say tip amounts because she also recapped the second paying tip customer. And it was also twice the amount than what I received. So I've got new information here, and it is recorded. And I said, well, how do we move forward? She stated that they would send me an email, and I would attach a screenshot of my earnings, and they would look into it. Now, at this point, I'm thinking, great. Once they look into it, it'll be resolved. But I was a little bit too optimistic, you might say. I hadn't received a call back, at least not in a timely manner, so I made a third call. This time I reach a gentleman, and he pulls up the account information, recaps the orders, but there's a peculiarity this time. When he reads off what his records indicate, they're identical to what my screenshot indicates. Now, of course, I can't make any conclusions, but I do wonder if once I sent a screenshot of my earnings, if someone in the DoorDash department did not go into those accounts and edit the tip amounts, reducing them 50% so they would only reflect what my earnings reflected on my app. And you would think at this point, if there's no tip discrepancy, unlike the first two calls I made, how would I move forward? But as I mentioned, I have recorded phone conversations with DoorDash since they have provided express consent that I can do so. So at this point, I play an excerpt of the previous call to this current representative where it is revealed that the tip amounts were actually twice what his current records indicated. At that point, the representative pauses for a second and then states that there has been a change to the tips. Those are his words, and I have that recorded as well. So at this point, I say, how do we move forward? I'm told that a supervisor will be in touch. Eventually, I receive a call from a DoorDash supervisor from that team. This was a highly unusual call. Up until this point, everyone I've spoken with has been very professional and very direct. However, when speaking with this supervisor, it was quite problematic. First of all, she pulls up the records, and like the previous call, she states that the earnings showing up on her database are identical to what's on my earnings app. She will not budge. So at that point, I pull out an excerpt from the first call I recorded where the DoorDash representative read off tip amounts that were twice as much as what her current database is reflecting. And then I play her an excerpt from the next call where the DoorDash representative listened to that previous call, and his response was that there had been a change made to the tips. At this point, the DoorDash supervisor is providing no help. In fact, she is giving me roundabout answers, scripted responses. This is a DoorDash supervisor from that team, mind you, and providing no help. I do wonder if this call was not monitored by someone else and she was being fed responses to give me. I don't know that, but I do wonder because, again, I'm getting ambiguous responses. This call went on for a long time. In fact, after 30 minutes, I asked her a question, and I said, this is a yes or no question, and you can provide me with a yes or no response. Does DoorDash have the capability to alter tips? Her response was yes. This was a long call. In fact, I deliberately tried to make it a long call because I hoped that if someone was looking at the call volume and saw that this call lasted for more than 30 minutes, that it might raise a flag and might go to someone who could get the results that I deserved. The only thing I was told was that they would look into it. That was it. Now, this went on for weeks and weeks. I made other calls in between this as well. Now, you might be thinking, why would you invest this much time? This certainly couldn't have been hundreds of dollars that you lost. It's a matter of principle. I earned it, I deserved it, and I wanted it. After nearly 30 days, the phone rings. I'm not in my house, so I can't record the call, so I let this go to voicemail. And on that voicemail recording is a DoorDash supervisor stating that I had been subjected to, in her words, missing tips, and that I would receive those missing tips. And this is nearly a month after the incident occurred. So I have in my possession that voicemail recording, as well as a screenshot of the earnings that I was supposed to receive. So at this point, you might be thinking, case closed. Not entirely. And I'll explain why. While waiting for this situation to get resolved, I had a lot of time to think. And one of my thoughts was, okay, it's not as if DoorDash called me after this assignment and said, Driver Dan, it looks like we've made a mistake and you only received 50% of the tips that you are entitled to. It's not as though when I called DoorDash support for something totally unrelated and they recapped the order, it's not as if they said, oh, wait a minute. It looks like you only received 50% of the tips to which you're entitled. It's not as though there was any admittance on their part or acknowledgement. It was by a fluke discovery that I discovered that DoorDash had only paid me 50% of the 100% tips to which I was entitled. So I found out. And that made me wonder. I have over 9,000 deliveries. Now, am I to believe that of those 9,000 plus deliveries, that this compromise on my tips only occurred once? And by a fluke discovery, I called for an entirely different reason. And by a fluke discovery, when they read off the entire assignment and mentioned the tip amount, was it discovered that I'd only received 50%. Only once out of my 9,000 plus deliveries, and I just happened to call on that particular incident. Those, to me, seem like unbelievable odds. And how about you as a dasher? Do you not think this may have happened to you as well? I don't know the answer to that. I also don't know the answer to how many other times this may or may not have occurred in my 9,000 plus deliveries. So that begs the question. So at this point, since it was ruled in my favor that I was subjected to missing tips, I wanted to find out if any other instances like this may have occurred without my knowledge. So I tried to reach DoorDash. You can't reach anyone in the California office, at least from my attempts. And when you try to find a DoorDash address for a particular department, that's elusive as well, at least in my experience. I believe, I don't know for sure, but I think I read that they have over 60 different departments. But when you try to find a specific department online or by calling DoorDash support, all you can get is one address, no departments. So at this point, I composed a letter explaining that I was subjected to missing tips. DoorDash ruled in my favor that I was indeed subjected to missing tips. And that leads me to wonder, of my 9,000 plus deliveries, how many others may have been compromised. Therefore, in this letter, I said that I am requesting an itemized listing of all my delivery assignments and payouts maximized by state law. The reason I made that request is because, for tax purposes, I always screen capture my pickups and my drop-offs so I can determine the mileage for tax purposes. So that way I can compare my records to theirs. This was sent as a registered letter. I have a copy of the registered letter. I have a copy of the envelope with the registration certification on it, and also a record indicating from the United States Postal Service when this letter was delivered. There has been no response. I need answers. I deserve answers. At this point, I have many options. The first, as you can see, is I'm going slightly public with this situation for other people to be aware. I could go further. I know if you've read online yourself, you've probably realized that New York Times has written several articles not exactly in a favorable light about DoorDash. And if I supply New York Times with screen captures, recordings, everything solidifying that everything I am stating is irrefutable, I'm pretty confident that they would run with this and it would get worldwide exposure. The only reason I've been a little bit reticent is because I've read that there are between 6 and 7 million DoorDashers out there. A lot of these people are income dependent on DoorDash. And if this reached worldwide exposure, I would imagine that there would be lawsuits, class action lawsuits. Stockholders may be a little reluctant to stay on board and may withdraw. Audits, DoorDash could pause operation. I don't know, maybe that could happen. And if it did, that would also affect a lot of people out there who depend on DoorDash for their livelihood. So I've tried to avoid going in that direction, at least so far. But I'm sure a lot of DoorDashers out there are also wondering, if this has occurred with them. Now, I'm providing you with a hypothesis, just a hypothesis here. But let's say that each Dasher has, on an average, lost $3 of their entitled tips. Again, I'm just providing a hypothetical situation. If each Dasher had, on an average, $3 missing, and let's say there are 7 million Dashers, you multiply $3 times 7 million, that's $21 million not in the hand of DoorDashers.